The U.S. begins the search for those behind Tuesday's deadly attacks and gets a strong show of support from its closest allies.
Article 5 of the Charter says that an attack from abroad by any one against any member of the alliance is an attack against the alliance.
And in New York, the still smoldering ruins yield stories of horror and also survival. From CNN Center, I'm Jonathan Mann.
And I'm Relita Vasilova. We will have new details on the investigation of the terrorist attacks in New York City and Washington in just a moment. But first, let's go right to the scene of the worst devastation, New York, where CNN's Alessio Vinci joins us live. Alessio.
Well, Rolitza, there are many things, many incredible things that have happened here in the last 2 days in New York. One of them right behind me here, if you can see, even in the middle of the night, you can see the high cloud of white smoke still billowing on top of the wreckage of the two towers that collapsed after the passenger jets hit them. More than 40 hours later, still thick white smoke billowing from there. An indication how difficult it is still down there for the hundreds of rescue workers trying to remove some of the debris and try to see if perhaps somebody is still alive underneath that rubble. The workers there working on 12-hour shifts, perhaps some of them even longer. The buildings surrounding the World Trade Center very much unstable and making that rescue operation even more dangerous. We spent several hours earlier today with some of the workers there. We could see several long lines of dumpster trucks being used to take away from the area the debris. We also saw some refrigerator trucks, an indication that some of the bodies would be found and taken to the morgue. The last official count at this time is 82 bodies found. Only 16 of them have been identified. The number of casualties, of course, is set to increase once the rescue operation continues. Mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, has asked the Federal Emergency Management Agency to bring 6,000 body bags here in New York. Meanwhile, the lower part of New York, south of 14th Street, remains completely sealed off by the police. A good portion of the lower Manhattan is also without electricity. That's why many people have been evacuated, especially the elderly ones. Some people also left on their own, and I've been able to speak to some people earlier today. Some people here in lower Manhattan who said that even in the wake of this catastrophe, they wanted to remain here. One person saying, looking at the sky, saying, "I cannot believe that the two towers are no longer there." Back to you, Alisa.
Alessia, also from the reports we were hearing, it's also difficult to breathe.
Absolutely, Ralitza. We spent there only 20 minutes down there, about a half an hour perhaps, and after that we could really, we were really having a hard time, difficulties in breathing. There is smoke, there is dust, there is a lot of debris throughout the area where the two towers collapsed. Any kind of emergency official there or the rescue workers are all using gas masks in order to be able to sustain hours and hours of very hard work. As I said, some shifts lasting 12 hours or more without a gas mask. It would be practically impossible to remain so close to the fire, so close to the smoke, and try to bring some of the bodies out of there.
Alessio, is there still hope that survivors may be found?
Well, I spoke to some rescue workers earlier, and they said that yes, they do have hope. Certainly, they haven't found any body alive for the last several hours. We heard earlier, a couple of hours ago on CNN, one of the volunteer rescuers who was saying that so far he has only found body parts and no body, and certainly nobody alive. So there is still hope, but after more than 40 hours, and given the fact that two towers, 110 stories high, collapsed, it's really unlikely that at this point any person alive could be found. But the work is continue, and it is still a search and rescue operation.
Alessia, thank you.
The FBI says it's pursuing some 2,000 leads in its investigation of the attacks on the symbols of America's financial and military might. It says as many as 50 people may have helped plan and execute the attacks that leveled the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center and damaged the Pentagon. Among that group, the FBI says it believes between 12 and 24 hijackers commandeered the 4 jets involved, and it says investigators have identified many of those it believes hijacked the planes. Attorney General John Ashcroft calls the probe into Tuesday's attacks the most intensive investigation and the most massive in American history. And as David Ensor reports, U.S. officials apparently have already made real progress.
U.S. officials say on the passenger manifests of the hijacked planes used in the attacks, they found names associated with terrorist groups. Intelligence officials say the evidence still points to the al-Qaeda group, headed by Osama bin Laden.
There had to be some brains behind this. We have some good, promising leads. They're obviously being followed.
Publicly, the Bush administration is accusing no one so far, while warning nations they too will pay for any help given to those who attacked New York and Washington.
We will hold accountable those countries that provide support, that give host nation, if you can call it that, support and facilities to these kinds of terrorist groups.
Afghanistan's Taliban government has long offered haven to bin Laden, but U.S. officials say they have no evidence thus far of any state directly assisting the attacks in New York and Washington. Many analysts argue that such a coordinated broadside could not have been possible without it.
Osama bin Laden represents a complete terrorist network. He will have one or more state sponsors, countries that he's either based in or working in collusion with. There'll have been passport support, communication support.
One thing I think that ought to make us a bit suspicious about whether bin Laden was involved in it alone or not is that he goes to great lengths to advertise himself. And when you see something like that, you begin to wonder whether or not there may be an effort to draw our attention solely to him, to the neglect of someone who may be his principal contractor.
If there was state support, a number of terrorism experts point to Iraq as the most likely suspect. A statement from President Saddam Hussein on Iraqi television said, quote, "The United States reaps the thorns that its rulers have sown in the world."
U.S. officials say they are developing good law enforcement and intelligence leads. They do not know yet who was behind these attacks, nor whether any state assisted them. But they believe they soon will. David Ensor, CNN, Washington.
The U.S. military says it's assuming a defensive posture along both coasts of the United States to protect its borders. For more on that, we go live now to the Pentagon and CNN's Mark Potter. Mark?
Well, John, activity is still afoot here at the Pentagon. It's quiet at this hour, but the building is still very operational. Lots of things going on, and we're told that it will be fully operational later today. All available personnel are expected to report to work despite the damage to the building, which we are seeing a live picture of right now. In this area destroyed by the airplane attack, workers continue to sift through the rubble and to try to shore up the structure so they can go deeper into the building. They're looking for victims, and they say they don't expect to find any survivors. The anticipated death toll here is in the area of 200, including those who died in the plane. Now, we have a graphic that we would like to show you, if we could, showing the area hit by the plane and affected by the very intense fire. Fully half of the entire Pentagon complex, as we can see here, is shut down now, and the corridors leading to those areas are blocked by armed guards. Ironically, the area hit by the plane had just been renovated. Now, officials say it could take months, if not years, to repair the damage to the building. Thousands of people here have been displaced, including the chiefs of the Navy and the Army. They will all have to work out of temporary offices now. In a recorded message to U.S. troops, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld once again hinted at upcoming military retaliations.
It is my duty as head of this department to tell you that much more will be asked of you in the weeks and months ahead. This is especially true of those who are in the field. We face powerful and terrible enemies, enemies we intend to vanquish, so that moments of horror, like yesterday, will be stopped.
Now here at the Pentagon, FBI agents also are on scene, sifting through the rubble, looking for evidence that would support a criminal case. Officials are also looking for the black boxes from the plane, the voice and the cockpit recorders, and they believe that there could be information on those boxes if they are found that could provide important information on exactly how this attack was planned, and perhaps could answer the question of whether the hijackers actually intended to attack the White House before turning the plane toward the Pentagon. That's a report, a suggestion coming out of the White House, which says it has credible information to that effect. Again, those black boxes have not yet been found. Back to you.
Mark, there are warships now up and down both coasts of the United States, west and east. It's an impressive display of gunboat diplomacy or something. Is it symbolic, or do they really expect still some kind of attack to come by sea?
Well, U.S. military officials say that those ships along the east and west coast are there in a defensive posture, particularly when talking about the east coast. They say the ships there are to protect particularly the areas of New York City and Washington, D.C., against further airborne attacks. There are 2 carriers and support ships, 5 support ships on the East Coast, 1 carrier and 14 warships on the West Coast and in the area of Hawaii. It is a symbolic gesture on the one hand, but it does have an important defensive position, and it does represent a concern on the part of the U.S. military.
Let me ask you about something else that we just heard from the Secretary of Defense, who described the U.S. facing what he called a powerful and terrible enemy. When the Secretary of Defense of a nation as powerful as this one uses that kind of language, who's he talking about?
He's talking about the terrorists, the international terrorists, people who are willing to die in the furtherance of their goals, a very difficult enemy to fight. That's exactly what he's talking about, and he's bracing the troops for the possibility that they may have to go into action.
Mark Potter at the Pentagon, thanks very much. Milica.
Secretary of State Colin Powell says he's building a strong coalition of international support as the United States considers its response to the attacks. He also had words for Pakistan, which has a close relationship with Afghanistan, where suspected terrorist Osama bin Laden is thought to be hiding.
We have not made a determination yet as to who is responsible for yesterday's attack. But we thought, as we gather information and as we look at possible sources of the attack, it would be useful to point out to the Pakistani leadership at every level that we are looking for and expecting their fullest cooperation and their help and support as we conduct this investigation and as we generate more information.
The United States ambassador to Pakistan is in Islamabad. Wendy Chamberlain is to meet with Pakistani President General Pervez Musharraf Thursday. Earlier, Mr. Musharraf made a national address in which he pledged to cooperate with Washington.
Pakistan has been extending cooperation to international efforts to combat terrorism in the past and will continue to do so in the future. Countries must join hands in this common cause. I wish to assure President Bush once again and the United States government of our unstinted cooperation in the fight against terrorism.
In Afghanistan, the fear of possible attacks by the United States and its allies has residents and international aid workers fleeing the country. The United Nations and International Red Cross have already pulled some personnel out. Our Nick Robertson is in Kabul, Afghanistan, and he joins us from there by video phone. Nick.
Lisa, a little while ago, 3 United Nations flights left the capital of Afghanistan, Kabul, for Pakistan. On board the last of the international United Nations staff here in Afghanistan. Before they left, they paid off all their employees and taken away key documents with them. Also today, representatives from the International Committee of the Department is fueling among the population in Kabul, parts of Afghanistan, what could be expected in this. They are concerned that Afghanistan could be targeted as some kind of solution on the United States. The Taliban yesterday issued a dire request, in fact, unusual for the leadership to issue of this nature, appealing to the United States judgment is appealed for that they hope would prevail in the United States. They explained that Afghanistan is a very poor country and that Afghanistan would not the Afghan people. Likewise, they attacking the Taliban and killing the Taliban. It would not help Afghanistan.
Nick, thank you. Unfortunately, we apologize for the technical glitches. They were not able to hear Nick Robertson very well. We will try to get him a little later to talk to him again. Rescue workers in New York say the search effort is a painstaking process. Debris is being removed by handful and searched for anything of significance.
Everyone has the hopes of finding yet another survivor. They're digging deep and they're digging hard, looking, but again, it's being done by hand. The iron workers that are working in there are working to remove the steel, of which is on top of a lot of the bodies. We're sifting through the debris. A lot of the body parts and the debris are one and the same. It's just becoming, right now at this point, foul. The smell is starting to come from the dead. So the bodies are a little bit easier to identify at this point, although it's going to be a long, long process.
A pall hangs over the desperate search for survivors in New York. Hundreds of the surrounding buildings are damaged, some near collapse. 5 survivors were pulled from the mountain of wreckage on Wednesday, and rescue workers plod on through the night, hoping others are still alive. Garrick Utley joins us now live from New York with some thoughts. Garrick.
Yes, really. So we want to look at how the United States, how the Americans are doing, coping with the stress, the aftermath of these terrorist attacks. It's been said, of course, as we all know, that adversity is a very good test of character. And if we use that scale, there's nothing more adverse than what this country has been going through these last couple of days. And look at the response. Yes, there was the understandable chaos around the towers, the World Trade Center, when they came tumbling down. But after that, there was order, there was discipline. There's been no looting reported in the city when that could have happened. People are volunteering in long lines to donate their blood. There was on Wednesday evening one bomb alert, a hoax, but one so far. That's was perhaps to be expected. But above all, what's been impressive is the way people have pulled together to volunteer, to contribute, to give wherever and however they can. Here is a report from CNN's Brian Palmer.
A steady procession snakes south toward the smoke and wreckage of the World Trade Center. Police, firefighters, National Guard, and volunteers, hundreds of volunteers from all over the country. Clergy.
Well, I'm here to give any assistance that I can, for both the living and the dead.
Doctors and nurses.
We're from Texas. We're headed to help out.
Nursing assistant Cheryl Herring drove down from Massachusetts.
We've been taking care of the firefighters as they come in with exhaustion, giving them water, cleaning out their eyes, taking their vital signs.
An estimated 1,700 people have been treated at New York hospitals, with 150 doctors doing triage alone. The New York Red Cross is fielding 350 disaster response volunteers and 500 mental health professionals to help New Yorkers cope. U.S. companies are pitching in too. Cisco Systems is donating $4 million and General Electric $10 million to families of emergency workers. Iron workers join the effort, like Joe Mooney, who helped build the Trade Center towers.
What's your reaction to all this, Mr. Mooney?
I'm sick.
They crossed paths with weary men and women headed home for a few hours sleep or simply to a clear patch of sidewalk. And they passed bewildered and shell-shocked residents.
It's frightening to think, is this the beginning of what other people have been going through all over the world for decades and decades?
Firefighter John McAllister headed back to the carnage after already putting in 24 hours.
Heading down there and maybe help get some guys out.
I am saddened, outraged, disappointed, overjoyed by the camaraderie and the amazing effort, the coming together of New Yorkers.
Bill Cook is a retired detective.
I just couldn't stand to watch it on TV and not be a part of it. So I called my chief, and I was part of this unit 3 years ago, and I said, I got to do something.
But amidst the sadness, some reasons to rejoice. Port Authority police found one of their lost officers alive in the rubble.
I was extremely happy, and someone had asked me that earlier, and I compared it to the birth of my children.
It was like having a life come into my life. And when they found them, it was just, we were great. We were happy.
And signs just a few blocks north that life in New York has not been totally disrupted. But things have changed for New Yorkers. Parents asked the media to stay out of the park to avoid upsetting the children. Brian Palmer, CNN, New York.
Well, if the camera was kept out of that playground in New York City, you may have noticed something else. The media so far has been kept away from the immediate ground zero where the rescue efforts are underway, the attempts to recover any survivors or otherwise the victims, expected to be the thousands of victims in the wake of this terrorist attack. Now, you might ask or wonder, why is this? Well, one reason, of course, is that there's so many media, so many camera teams that they're allowed in there. If we were allowed in there, we'd be swarming all over the place and might well interfere with the recovery efforts. That's a judgment called by city officials. There also may be a second factor at work, the fact that perhaps hundreds or thousands of bodies will be recovered. Is that an image people really want to see? Is it images people should be seeing? That debate hasn't really started, but we will see whether we are going to see it in the weeks and the months to come. Relitza, back to you.
Difficult times to come yet. Garrick, thank you very much.
The scene outside the Pentagon is one of dueling emotions. Relatives have expressed anguish and hope as they keep vigil, and emergency crews search for between 100 and 200 people missing. Sheila Cast has been speaking to some of those people waiting.
The second terrorist attack was a direct hit on the office space of Morgan Stanley. The firm had 3,500 workers in 22 floors, almost exactly in the area where the second plane hit. But incredibly, most of those employees had already fled the tower minutes before the explosion.
Miraculously, I'd say, we had 2,500 people in World Trade Center 2.
Our apologies, that was not the report that Sheila Cast prepared, but we do have that for you now.
Tracy Rowenhorst stands vigil as close as she can to the spot where the jet slammed into the Pentagon. She looks for any movement, any relevant detail. On Tuesday, her husband Edward, an accountant for the Army, was working near that spot.
I feel I need to be here with him. If he's alive, then he'll definitely need me when he comes out.
It is a frustrating but not lonely vigil. Eddie's parents and the best friends and neighbors who knew him even before he married Tracy 10 years and 2 kids ago keep each other's hopes up with wisecracks and jokes. That's what Eddie would do if he were with them, they say.
I'm trying to be incredibly focused. If I don't, then I would be hysterical. And right now I don't need to be there. I need to be here, watching, waiting.
Officials say the best prospects for finding survivors are at the edges of the impact zone, where the smoke and the heat may not have been as intense. The husband of one who has survived keeps his own vigil at a hospital across town.
You can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon.
As soon as the first pictures flashed onto television, even though it was only Louise Kurtz's second day on the job, her husband Michael started to worry. Hours later, the hospital phoned.
I came in teary-eyed. I didn't recognize my wife of 31 years. She's doing better. She's got 70% burns on her body.
Back at what Tracy Rowenhorst calls ground zero, touched by an occasional prayer, she intends to keep her vigil.
We're just sitting in limbo until they start bringing bodies out, I guess. Either way, dead or alive. And we'll be here until the very... If he's the last one out, we'll be here until he comes out.
Sheila Cast for CNN, Washington.
The attacks have left many people psychologically scarred and many others in need of grief counseling. For more on this aspect of this tragedy, we're joined from London by grief counselor Colin Grange. Mr. Grange, thank you very much for joining us. First of all, this is an unprecedented attack, a new form of terrorism. Is this a challenge for you as you try to counsel the victims?
Oh, indeed. One of the major problems, of course, is just the sheer enormity of what happened and how it happened on TV and at several layers. The first airplane into the Twin Tower, the second, and then of course the towers themselves collapsing. So we're trying to... Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
We're trying to provide support to the employees of the major investment banks, airlines, who are suffering over here in London because they have lost colleagues, and of course they're very familiar with the buildings and so on. And they really need help overcoming feelings of disbelief, deep sadness, shock, and of course anger, which is covering up many other emotions of hurt.
So how do you help them? What do you tell them?
Well, we provide a telephone support service 24 hours a day to all the employees of our client organisations, and we help them talk through their feelings either over the phone. We're also providing professionals on site in these organisations so that if anybody wants to come along and talk about their feelings, we can help them. We're really trying to help our organisations go through a really quite a fine line of trying to keep things as normal as possible, which can help people keep structure to their lives over here working in London, but also to acknowledge the deep distress and sadness that there is around the employees.
What about those who have not lost loved ones, those who were just in New York, they witnessed it, but they were not directly impacted by it? How do they deal with the sense of vulnerability that they will feel for a long time, and just the horror of what happened and what has forever scarred their city?
Well, it will take a long time for many people who witnessed the event. Again, a strong sense of disbelief is around, simply because it was almost like watching a movie. The only time you see that level of destruction is when you're looking at a motion picture where it's all special effects. So the disbelief, I believe, would still be strong in a lot of people, and it will take some time to come to terms with all the fear and distress and sadness that's been experienced. Obviously, we at Ceridian provide services worldwide, and that includes providing services to some of the victims and the people immediately involved in New York, as well as the services we provide over here in London.
You say you help people come to terms, but can people really come to terms with what happened in New York?
Yes, it's obviously going to be a very significant event in their lives, and it will never be forgotten. But we have learned over the last 10 or 15 years of how we can support people experiencing these kinds of traumatic experiences. We can help them talk through the feelings that they have, what they may be experiencing, such as sleeplessness, a high level of anxiety, being very jumpy, reliving the experience by having images of what happened. And we have developed ways of managing these incidents right from the beginning, providing proactive help to people relatively soon after the event, 2-3 days, right through to providing post-traumatic counselling for people who have symptoms that don't start to recover after a few weeks.
Are there symptoms that come about later? As you say, people are now in shock, in disbelief.
Well, that can happen, of course. I mean, many people who are physically injured probably won't experience the full psychological impact until their physical injuries have recovered to some extent. And again, many people may not experience the full trauma until later on. Some people can seem to go on as normal for several weeks, and then they might start experiencing psychological problems. Again, everybody's different, and it will depend on how they react. Again, some other people may not have been directly involved in the incident, but they may have previous traumatic experiences reawakened, especially as what has happened was so visible. They were watching it on the news as it happened, and that may well force and cause them to re-experience previous traumas in their lives.
Mr. Grange, thank you very much. John.
Thank you.
A moment ago, we showed you a portion of a taped report by mistake, but it's a remarkable story well worth seeing. A well-known investment bank was headquartered at the World Trade Center. Its staff might have been easy victims for the two planes which flew into the Twin Towers. But as Peter